We're going to do one more episode on critical thinking. And if you've been listening to this mini-series, I thank you very much. I hope you're being stimulated to ask questions and think deeper as we've talked about how we as believers, as people of faith, but also as parents and teachers and colleagues and people who enjoy intellectual conversations are going to just do a better job at conversing and learning and analyzing. These are essential skills, particularly in a culture that has shifted dramatically away from even 200 or 300 years ago when our students in grade school were learning Latin and Greek. And today they're trying to figure out whether they're a male or a female. And you say, well, that's, no, I mean, that's a big deal. That's a real big deal. And it's also part of a philosophical construct. Is there such a thing as absolute truth? Does the truth matter? Is history relevant? These are important educational philosophies that often, unless you're engaged and unless you're thinking, you get pulled into the vortex of the change without ever knowing from whence the change originates. So that's part of it. So without getting too much deeper into that, This is the second part on how we can kind of teach critical thinking to others around us, how to make sure we're engaged in it. We talked a little bit from a broader point. I want to get more practical on this episode. And I think one of the things we have to do is personally reflect on our thinking process. I think regularly we have to be careful because of our own default settings, our own proclivities and natural tendencies. Where do we go when we form our opinions, for instance? Where are we getting our information, and how do we make decisions? Because, again, the culture, follow your heart. Well, I got to tell you, the scripture says, first of all, the scripture says don't trust your heart. It's desperately
wicked.
But if I had a nickel for every time I hear that in the culture today, well, just follow your heart. Just to be true to yourself. Just, decide what's best for you. And those are just philosophically unsound, even if you're not a believer.
Yeah. It's just like it's basically saying just follow the elephant. If we go back to that analogy that Jonathan Haidt uses, it's like if you're riding the elephant, it's like just let the elephant take you wherever it's gonna. It's like no. Of course we should be more careful, and a lot of these decisions have major consequences. Like it's not a small thing for someone to go and decide to make X or Y decision. Yeah.
And I think this is an area that also I got to stop here and rant just a little bit because the reason I don't the reason I don't go to the gym?
Why?
Because it's hard.
Yeah.
I get sweaty. I gotta go. I gotta change my clothes.
We have to see all the other guys who are like way more masculine than us.
And I get to be reminded I'm in my 60s, and this guy here is 25 and cut out of steel.
How is it that they all have it together and we don't?
Yeah, and so it's hard, and I don't want to do it.
Yep.
I feel flat. I don't want to do it. Yep. Well, the same is true in intellectual development. So I love asking people, what is on your nightstand? That's one of my favorite questions I'll ask people. And it's interesting. Some people look at me like a calf looking at a new gate, like, where'd that come from? And why are you,
Yeah.
But others will jump right into it. Well, I've got 4 books on my nightstand right now. I've got 3 books on my nightstand. Great. What are they?
Yeah.
And,
does Kindle count?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to read on Kindle?
I think it does.
Books?
And they're on my iPad, and my iPad's on my nightstand.
There you go. Okay. Because I don't have real books on my nightstand anymore.
Not anymore. That way you don't have to store them and move them. But it's hard. But I think each of us have a responsibility to do hard things if we want good results.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to spend 40 minutes of doom scrolling in the evening after we've had a long day. And it is harder to spend 40 minutes reading a book that's nonfiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is.
But if also, and I know like a lot of this we're kind of wanting to talk to parents, like arguably we have even more of an obligation to do that hard work if we have kids, because while it's obvious to people, like I'm rewatching one of my favorite shows of all time right now, Lost, for the 4th or 5th time. I don't know. But like Lost is Lost was written basically about bad dads. Like almost every character is being motivated by a bad relationship with their father. And it's like, there's these obvious cases where like, oh yeah, obviously dads shouldn't abuse their kids and stuff. But I would say if you are not doing any intellectual work, you're just like zoning out on Fox News or TikTok every day, like you will end up making worse decisions. You are going to think worse. You're going to say and do things around your kids that will have an effect on them. And so we should be careful about that too.
Yeah, and I would think also, I think the rise of anxiety is also to some extent related to how they get you to watch.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You
Talk
don't-
about that.
You don't watch boring stuff. You
Yeah.
watch stuff that titillates. You watch stuff that offends.
Makes you angry.
It makes you angry, outrages you.
Disgusts you.
I think that you are giving evidence of critical thinking if you'll go to your favorite website. I don't care, Fox News, CNN, anything in between, and look at the headlines and see the manipulation
Yes.
that gets you to click on this.
Yes.
One of the favorite ways that modern media is doing that is saying, they'll make a statement, father refuses to pay for his daughter's wedding. The internet goes wild.
The internet goes wild.
Yeah, that's what they always, there's that, Fox News is really good about this. Yeah, and so you look at it, and they've developed an entire news story on their front page, top 12 articles, based on a Reddit thread.
Quoting tweets and things like that throughout
Either
the whole
an
thing.
X thread or a Reddit thread.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, I got to tell you, Josh, I am not a strong man. I'll click on the stupid thing, and then I hate myself for it because I have done what I think.
That's the important thing is at least you hate yourself. Not that you hate it, not literally, but you know what I mean? Like,
No,
at
I
least
literally-
you recognize that there's something off there.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's really important that we go to this issue of analyzing our thinking process, of developing these analytical skills, that we're breaking down information, beginning with where did it come from and why am I reading this? Why is this important?
Quick practical thing. So Ground News is an app that and that is becoming more popular. It's kind of like Tangle, which I mentioned a few episodes ago, but Ground News is more of an aggregator where you're getting, it's like all of the big news headlines, but you're getting a sense of, okay, what are the ones with right bias, central, left, and you can kind of compare the headlines that way. If you want to be like, here, how is the right kind of headlining this, and then how is the left? And you can see very wildly different headlines, and that can be kind of a helpful way to.
Yeah, it is very helpful. And also it is good to try to find these middle grounds.
Yes.
You mentioned is it Ground News?
Ground News.
Yeah, so you can Google that and find it, and I will be doing that. I subscribe to a daily newsletter called 1440. So 1440 is an aggregate that'll give you probably between 12 and 20 news links that are presented very subjectively. Subjectively. You do not know where they're coming from, the right or the left, which is a good thing. And here's the thing I like about them. They also give you a good dose of clickbait. Because
why is that a good thing?
Because we all like potato chips.
Yeah, okay, I see.
We all want the Girl Scout
We need to not be
peanut
too
butter cookie.
purist.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so and they call it clickbait. They literally call it, and it'll be 10 best places to retire. It'll be the 15 most popular Halloween costumes for this year. Just something that's mindless.
Yeah.
And he kind of get your sugar rush from that. But the first 2/3 of the page are these articles that are presented that do not have a bias on them. So
that actually might be brilliant. Is to if you can, because then if you can get it so that people are getting that sugar rush from that specific place, that source, and in that context, that's really smart.
Yeah, it's not rage bait. It is clickbait.
Yeah.
And it is often a list. And I've always been this way.
Love them. Listicles.
I used to watch Letterman just for the top 10 list years ago. Most people don't know who Letterman is anymore.
It was one of the best parts.
As soon as he did the
show.
top 10 list, I was done. I went to bed.
Really
So, again, going back to the practical, I think the notion of reading critically is super important.
Yeah.
First of all, I think the issue of reading is super important.
Yes.
And, many people only read when they have to.
Yeah.
Or they read something that is for them mindless. And I'm not against fiction. Great fiction teaches you good grammar and how to write and imagination, creativity. Great, well-crafted fiction has a moral message to it. So I'm not saying never read fiction, even though I don't. I never read fiction. Because I'm so busy all the time, I have to read for information. I'm constantly trolling for information. But I'm not saying never read fiction, but I am saying read intentionally. So I have a friend who's the president of Correct Craft. His name is Bill Jurgen, a brilliant intellectual, just one of America's premier business leaders, one of the top businessmen in the state of Florida, thousands of employees across 20-some-odd companies. They build ski nautique boats. And he and we've known each other since before we were married. And he and I exchange book lists. And sometimes I'll post them. Sometimes I'll just say, hey, dude, I'm out of reading, or he'll do the same for me. It's cool because I save my best recommendations for him because I know he's going to read them, and I don't want to waste his time. But, and I get the best books. That man is the most diversely read man I've ever known in my life. He'll read everything. And he listens to a lot of it because he travels a lot. So a lot of it's audiobook, which I don't. I read. I'm weird that way.
I like the Audible thing.
But I will tell you, he can talk about just about anything.
Yeah.
Now, I know him well enough personally to know where his politics are, his faith journey is, and so forth. But he reads outside of that narrow lane that he likes. And he has challenged me over the years. So reading in general, but also reading critically, reading people you know you're going to disagree with. Just learn how they think. And I would just say as a parent, getting your kids to read, first of all, the great classics. Bill Bennett, William Bennett, the former Secretary of Education, had a couple of books that he put out years ago, and I can't remember their names right now, but Google his books. And they were what they call it, collections, there's a better word for it, of great classic literature. Anthologies, of Aesop's fables, and you could read them to your kids or read them with your kids. They were huge, thick volumes, and I've got them both. Those would be great things to have your kids read and discuss. They're moral tales, Canterbury Tales. And what you do in the process is you give your kid a great classical education, a great education of classical literature in many cases. So, but even as an adult, look at a legitimate bestseller list, not necessarily one you'd find on Time magazine or Amazon rather, but find out what thinkers are reading. And that's one of the questions I ask when I'm with somebody who's smarter than me, which is almost every conversation. I say, "What are you reading? What are you reading?" And I don't read every book they recommend, but when I hear three people mention the same book, okay, that one's going on my list.
That I end up prioritizing my list based on that. This is a little bit similar to, I think I like yours better. Okay, yours is going to sound a lot better. Reading Aesop's fables to your kids is going to sound better than this. But I have, and I feel like I've had some success with this. We got a logical fallacies book that's kind of written for kids, and I've read that too. We haven't gotten through the whole thing, but I've read like half of it probably. To our kids, and we'll read it out loud, and there'll be like exercises and questions, and we'll go back and forth. And we at first it didn't result in anything. They hated it. Okay, like when the beginning it was, but eventually it got to where when we were having the harder conversations that parents have to have with their kids, we're seeing like them being a lot more careful sometimes. I mean, I've never been maybe more proud of Noah than the time that he was using all these red herring fallacies at me. And I was like, tell me what a red herring fallacy is. And he was able to do it. He defined it really, really well. I'm like, okay, well, then you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Like, so, and so that is something that we have found. And you could do that. You could get them together and watch, whether it's a news clip or a clip from a debate or, anything, and just be like, hey, how many logical fallacies can we find? Make it a game. Make it a challenge. Make a bingo card out of it. Like,
that's why I've always, and I learned this from my own father, who was religious about watching what in our time zone, or Central Time Zone, the 5:30 evening news. Used to be Walter Cronkite, Tom Brokaw, those kind of people. But he always provided a running commentary as we were watching it, simply because he couldn't shut up because he felt like there was bias. And so, but I learned a lot of my critical thinking by listening to my dad rant at the news. So my kids should be experts, having heard me rant in the news over the years the way I do. But having those conversations around books. So I had an idea given to me years ago, and I tried it with some of my kids, and it didn't go as well as I hoped it would. Charlie Tremendous Jones, who wrote Life is Tremendous back in the 60s, had a saying that said, you'll be the same you are today as you are you'll be the same in 10 years as you are today, except for the books you read and the people you meet. And that statement just always stuck hard with me, particularly as it related to books. So somebody else gave me an idea at that time, and they said, give your kid a challenge, and you'll give him $10 for every book they read. And at the end, they'll have $1,000, and they'll have a $10,000 education.
Yeah.
Well, I would say today, I probably do it different. When my kid turns 12 years old, I'd say to him, look, you're going to want to buy a car in a few years. And when you're going to need a down payment on it, because I'm not giving you a car. Just telling you that right now, bub. You're not getting a car from me. But I will help you buy the car. And here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a book. I'm going to give you a list. It's going to have 200 books on it. You pick 100 of them. And for every book that you read and have a 30-minute conversation with me after you read it, I'll give you $100 in your car fund. So in 4 years, they could have read, 25 books a year, a book every other week, basically, had a conversation with you in it, and they've got $10,000 to buy a new car. If you do that, you've given them $1 million education in today's dollars.
Yeah, I mean, including the conversation.
The conversation is because
brilliant.
that's where you discuss and teach the critical thinking part.
Yeah.
Now, you're going to have to be intentional if you're going to do that. You're going to have to sell it because a 12-year-old isn't thinking what they would like to be when they're 16.
Yeah.
But let's say they only get half of them read. Let's say they get 50 and you give them $5,000. They got $5,000 that they worked hard for.
Yeah.
And you will have had, 25 hours of good conversations if you do it right. Yeah. And they will be able to, they'll think better. So I did my doctorate.
That's an amazing idea.
I did my doctorate when I was in my 20s. Yeah, I was in my 20s. On the impact of reading, test performance based on recreational reading.
What
now,
do you mean?
Recreational reading was reading for fun.
Right.
It wasn't assigned. And in those days, like, what did you do when you were a kid and you were eating cereal? What did you do?
Read the cereal box.
Absolutely. In those days, cereal boxes was...
Yep. It was interesting. There's a maze sometimes.
Yeah. Today we have the TV on in the kitchen. In those. So I did my doctorate on the idea that if a kid will just read, they could read the back of a cereal box. They could read little golden books, if you remember those back in the 90s. They're little tiny, you Google them, but they're worth a lot of money today. And you could get, they're probably 1,000 different topics. And Little Red Hen was one of them. And just any book they wanted. I didn't care. Any book they wanted, whatever grade level. And I had a test group of kids that were reading recreationally, had hit a certain level, and those that just didn't want to and wouldn't. And the test results not only improved for those who began recreational reading, but also for those who did versus those who didn't were significantly higher.
Yeah.
And that was my distinction, that even reading silly stuff makes you smarter.
I want to key in on that because I think that is another thing that a lot of people would lose when doing this. But I think giving them that autonomy, that choice helps so much. We've been doing this with William and homeschooling him, and we'll kind of like give him all the here. Pick a country out of the almanac, and we're going to learn a lot of all these different things about that country and like all these, and it ends up working so much better. And I've seen so many of my favorite like thinkers say that they had similar experiences in their childhood. Just one example that always comes to mind is Adam Savage. Did you watch Mythbusters while it was on the air?
I did not.
Do you know what this is?
I'm vaguely familiar with
Mythbusters was great. It's not on anymore, but Adam Savage was one of the two main guys on there. It's kind of always building things and making things, and his dad or maybe I guess it might have been his mom, but his parents when he was a kid basically set up a tab at the local craft store. Whereas like you get to just go in there and buy what you want so you can just practice making stuff. And it's just up to you. And he said that just had such an impact because then he could just kind of go and be like, hey, I want to try to learn about this and just do that. Now I can't afford to just give my kids like an open tab anywhere, but like that kind of autonomy of just like, I want to kind of just like, I want to feed into this. How can I invest in you? What are you most interested in? And being like, I'm going to just be a rocket behind that, I think can be really helpful.
I had a guy on my staff who did that with his son, who was mechanical. He was like tinkering with stuff, but he was a kid. He was 8 or 9. So his lawnmower died and it couldn't get fixed. Yeah. He brought the lawnmower back home, put it in his garage and said to his kid, his name was Nathan, he said, you can take it apart. That's all. And the kid went nuts. He took everything apart. Didn't say he had to put it back together. Didn't say anything. Just take it apart.
It wasn't about fixing it. It was just like, you can do, this is yours now.
So that kid today is now around 40 years old. He is an expert on sound technology, hanging speakers, fixing electronics. And I know for a fact it was because his dad encouraged him as a kid to just explore mechanical things.
Wow.
And so that's absolutely brilliant. And here's the other thing. It'll also teach critical thinking. For instance, when you said, pick a country. Mm-hmm. Well, instead of saying you're going to study France, you said pick a country. Yeah. So instead of being told what to do, he had that autonomy. Yeah. So he had to think, why do I want to study Italy? Where is Albania? Indonesia's boring, but Australia is. And they they had to make it. Having your kid make decisions is a part of teaching them critical thinking.
Yes.
So giving them hypotheticals.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're driving. One of my kids, we used to play this really gross game. Okay. I'm embarrassed at that. Would you rather die, A or B?
Oh, all the kids play Would You Rather.
Yeah, but did they play it with their dad?
I get this forced on me by my kids.
Would you rather slide down a banister of razor blades into a bucket of salt water or drown in a bucket of puke? Was one of my favorite ones. Only a 12-year-old could come up with some of those, except for maybe me, which kind of 12-year-old.
But here we are.
Yeah, here we are. But so using those kind of scenarios, okay, you're at a party. Mm-hmm. Right. And you get there and you thought it's going to be all church kids, and it is. But somebody said, I brought pot. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Now, they're going to give you, well, I'm going to resist, flee temptation.
Right.
And, oh, no, you're not, you big sissy.
Oh, that's interesting.
Your dad's never going to, and you play the part with them. And again, this is resistance training. So he's resisting the temptation, and he'll tell he'll play with you if you do this, but so you're out with your girlfriend, and all of a sudden she says, hey, we can go over to my dad's house because he's not home this weekend. Nobody's there, but I know where the key is. So again, kids are going to be kids.
You got to be thinking about this stuff beforehand.
Yeah, you got to be thinking. I mean, I'm not saying do this with your 6-year-old, but if I had a 15-year-old kid who's not dating yet, and I'm trying to teach him principles of moral purity, these are real life scenarios. Absolutely. And you and I grew up. We know those are real life scenarios, and we grew up in sheltered church homes. Yes. So we have to be. We
also probably all saw the most over sheltered kids in church go crazy as soon as they hit 18.
Bonkers.
So there's a human nature interesting thing going on there too that we ought to be at least considering.
We're out of time, but here's the last one, and I'll close with this, and we'll be done with the series. But it is this: sometimes they've got to embrace uncertainty.
Yes,
you got to do it.
Yes,
there's not a clean answer to every question, not even every question in the Bible. My theology, as I've grown up, has not shifted dramatically from the fundamentals, but things like eschatology sure have. I still hold a preference for the eschatology I was grown up in, probably because it feels comfortable to me and I'm more versed in it. Sure. But I no longer believe that I'm absolutely correct on it. And now everybody's going to say, what is it? What is it? But there are some things it's okay to hold with an open hand.
Yes.
There are some things it is willing to concede a point for the sake of furthering the conversation. There are some things that, I can't say absolutely, but let me settle for authoritatively based on these things.
Yeah.
So, I think giving people permission to not always reach the same conclusion allows them to continue on their intellectual journey toward truth.
Yes. Like there's this website, I know there's a bunch of them, but there's this website where it's like, are you getting ready to vote? Here's kind of like plug in your zip code and then like put in all of your positions and all the issues, right? And it'll
this is the candidate kind of aligns with you?
So I've done that. And the thing is, and the best ones, there's at least one where it'll actually give you kind of a bunch of nuanced options and it won't just be binary. It'll be like kind of at least 5 options or whatever. But like in the end of the day, at least half of those topics that I'm supposed to have an opinion on, I don't have a strong opinion on. And I'm putting a lot of like, I don't knows where I'm slightly biased towards one or the other only because I haven't done the work. I haven't earned the right to have a strong opinion on a subject if I haven't thought strongly about what both sides, smart people on both sides, have to say. And that is okay. So I would say it is a good thing for us to have most of our views with an open hand. Like, you are not going to be able to be an expert enough on enough things to where you should be like, oh, yeah, it's cool that I'm super confident on half of my beliefs. Like, no, you shouldn't be.
And there's nothing more obnoxious than the guy who doesn't know what he's talking about but acts like he does.
Right. The Dunning-Kruger effect is real. Google it, people. Google it.
Yeah. So we've all had conversations with people like that or had them in our classrooms, and you just want to, oh my goodness.
Never mind. I shouldn't. Let's define it real quick. The Dunning-Kruger effect is that thing that happens when people don't know enough about a topic to the point that they think that they're an expert because they know so little on it. And there's an amazing documentary on Netflix about flat earthers. It's about the flat Earth community, and I don't think I've ever seen a better depiction of Dunning-Kruger effect, of what happens when a bunch of people who know just a little bit of science and then think that they are complete experts, when it's like, no, you don't have enough expertise to know how much that you don't know. And just like you said earlier, like the more that you know, the more like, oh my gosh, I'm missing so much knowledge, kind of a thing. So that's what Dunning-Kruger effect is.
Well, I tell you what, I've learned so much in this. I've got notes written to myself all over the place of things I'm going to go back and research, because that's what we do if we're critically thinking. Right. So thank you so much for Josh for bearing with me during these multiple episodes on critical thinking. Folks, I hope you're even more of a critical thinker than you were when you started this series with us, and I hope you'll continue to do that in the days to come. We thank you as always for listening to us here at Life Talks.